My husband called my promotion a pity project. He said it loud enough for his team to laugh. I didn't interrupt. I just memorized their faces. The private dining room at Marcello's had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, the kind of view our firm reserved for client celebrations and partner milestones. Tonight was supposed to be both. My promotion to Senior Operations Director had been announced that afternoon. My husband Andrew had suggested dinner to celebrate, his text arriving with 3 exclamation points and a champagne emoji. I'd believed him. The room hummed with low conversation, the clink of silverware on porcelain, occasional laughter from the bar visible through frosted glass. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, saxophone notes sliding through air that smelled of garlic, wine, and the Tom Ford cologne Andrew wore to important meetings. I'd given him that bottle for his birthday. I'd stepped away to take a call from Claire Donovan, our compliance director, about a client report deadline. 3 minutes, maybe 4? When I returned down the narrow hallway, I heard Andrew's voice carrying through the half-open door. Clear, confident, performing. Between you and me, he was saying, his tone pitched for an audience. The promotion's more about optics than merit. The board needed a diversity win this quarter. Julia's competent, sure, but Senior Operations Director? That's a stretch. I stopped walking. The hallway was dim, emergency exit signs casting green shadows on cream walls. Through the gap in the door, I could see Andrew at the head of the table, wine glass raised like a conductor's baton. 6 of his team members sat around him. Young associates, all men, all wearing variations of the same ambitious smile. Marcus Reed, an associate and Andrew's favorite mentee, leaned forward. So it's a pity promotion. Andrew's laugh was easy, comfortable, the sound of someone who'd never questioned his right to judge others. I wouldn't say pity, more like strategic positioning. She's been with the firm 17 years, never caused problems, checks the right boxes demographically. Perfect candidate for a symbolic gesture. Strategic positioning. I stood in that hallway, phone still in my hand, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. Like watching ice form on a window, patterns spreading in geometric certainty. Does she know? Jordan Price, a junior associate 2 years out of graduate school, asked. Know what? Andrew swirled his wine. Barolo from our personal collection. That I'd selected for tonight? That her promotion's essentially ceremonial? Julia's smart in her own way, but she doesn't operate at the strategic level. She's detail-oriented, good with compliance minutia, keeps the trains running on time. But vision, innovation, that's not her strength. Detail-oriented, compliance minutia, keeps the trains running on time. I'd spent 17 years building the operational infrastructure that allowed Andrew and partners like him to close deals and take credit. I'd restructured our audit protocols, reducing compliance violations by 73%. I'd negotiated the software integration that cut processing time by 40%. I'd personally salvaged the Dalton Industries account after Andrew's careless handling nearly cost us our largest client. But Andrew stood there, distributing my accomplishments like loose change to men who'd contributed nothing, reframing my expertise as limitation, my precision as lack of vision. Through the door, I watched Marcus refill Andrew's glass. Still, you must be proud. Your wife making Senior Operations Director. Of course, Andrew said, his voice carrying practiced warmth. I'm supportive. That's what marriage is about. But between us, I'm carrying most of the weight at home now. The promotion means longer hours for her, more stress. She's not equipped to handle. I'll be picking up the slack, managing her expectations, making sure she doesn't get overwhelmed and embarrass herself. Managing my expectations, making sure I didn't embarrass myself. I'd been managing his disasters for 12 years of marriage. The Hartwell audit he'd botched because he hadn't read regulatory updates. The Rothwell partnership pitch where I'd rewritten his entire presentation the night before because his numbers didn't reconcile. The Seattle conference where he'd mixed up 2 clients' portfolios, and I'd spent 72 hours reconstructing his credibility. Here's the thing about working with your spouse, Andrew continued, settling into sage advisor mode. You have to maintain professional boundaries. Julia tends to blur those lines, asks for my input on decisions she should be making independently. Part of why I think this promotion might be premature, she's not ready to operate autonomously at that level. I'd asked for his input twice in 17 years, both times because Brian Ellis, our managing partner, specifically requested cross-divisional coordination. Andrew had presented both collaborations as examples of his mentorship, his guidance shaping my supposedly limited capabilities. Jordan spoke again, testing boundaries. So when she fails? When she struggles, Andrew corrected, the distinction apparently meaningful, I'll be there to help her course correct. That's what partners do. But realistically, this promotion's probably her ceiling. Some people are built for execution, not strategy. The saxophone hit a long, low note that vibrated in my sternum. I counted to 10, the way my mother taught me when I was 7. Then I counted to 10 again. The phone in my hand felt distant, disconnected, a prop in someone else's scene. Before we go further, thank you for being here and listening to my story. I'm Julia Benson, and if you believe no one should be diminished for their work, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more women find stories like this. I pushed the door open, not dramatically, just a normal entry, the way someone returns from a phone call. The conversation died with surgical precision. 6 heads turned toward me in synchronized guilt. Andrew's wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth, Barolo, catching the ambient light. Julia, Andrew said, recovering first, his face transforming into something that might fool someone who hadn't just heard him dissect her worth. Everything okay with Claire? Fine, I said. I set my phone on the table next to my untouched wine glass. The water ring beneath it had spread into an irregular circle, condensation pooling on white linen, just confirming deadlines. I sat down at the opposite end of the table, appropriate distance for a celebration that had nothing to celebrate. Around me, his team studied their plates with sudden fascination. Jordan reached for bread. Marcus checked his watch. Tyler Grant, another associate on Andrew's team who hadn't spoken during Andrew's performance, met my eyes for half a second before looking away. That half second told me everything. He was sorry I'd heard, not sorry it happened. Andrew raised his glass again, the gesture slightly too eager. A toast. To Julia and her well-deserved promotion. The firm's lucky to have her expertise. Well-deserved. Expertise. Words he'd just finished explaining away as participation trophies and secretarial competence. The team raised their glasses with varying enthusiasm. I raised mine without drinking, watching Andrew over the rim. He held my gaze, his expression carefully calibrated. Supportive. Proud. Completely void of the contempt I'd just witnessed. The dinner continued for another 47 minutes. I counted. Appetizers arrived. Entrees followed, the halibut I'd ordered, sitting on the plate like an accusation. Andrew told stories about court cases, merger negotiations, his own triumphs. His team laughed at appropriate moments, asked admiring questions, performed the ritual of validation he needed, like oxygen. I said almost nothing, just sat there memorizing patterns. The way Marcus laughed half a second after Andrew did, calibrating his response. The way Jordan interrupted others but never Andrew. The way Tyler avoided looking at me entirely. The way Andrew's voice got louder with each glass of wine. His gestures broader, his stories more inflated. When dessert arrived, I excused myself. Not from the table. From the entire evening. I have early meetings tomorrow, I said, standing and reaching for my coat. Thank you all for coming. Andrew stood, confusion crossing his face. I'll get the car, he said. Stay, I said. I pulled on my coat, Burberry wool. I'd bought myself after closing the Whitman account, finished celebrating. I walked out through Marcello's main dining room, past tables of people toasting to things they'd actually earned. The autumn air outside was cold, sharp enough to hurt in my throat. I stood on the sidewalk, watching harbor lights reflect on black water, and made a decision that felt as permanent as the ice forming in my chest earlier. I would no longer protect him, not his reputation, not his ego, not his carefully constructed narrative, where I was the supporting character in his success story. My wine glass sat on that table, still full, untouched, abandoned, a symbol of restraint, a symbol of decision. I'd left it there deliberately, the way you leave behind things you no longer need. The office was quiet when I arrived at 6:47 the next morning. Gray light filtered through windows, the kind of pre-dawn illumination that makes everything look unfinished. The elevator to the 14th floor moved with mechanical precision, numbers ascending in amber. The hallway smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and old coffee. My office door opened silently. I'd had the hinges oiled last month. Inside, my desk sat exactly as I'd left it yesterday, before the announcement, before the dinner, before I understood what my husband actually thought of me. 3 stacked monitors, a filing system color-coded by client and urgency, the framed photograph of Andrew and me at our wedding that I turned face down without ceremony. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. Just the desk lamp, creating a circle of amber that felt safer than full illumination. My computer woke with a soft chime, requesting credentials I'd typed thousands of times. The desktop loaded, folders organized by department, project, fiscal quarter. Everything labeled, everything accessible, everything documented, detail-oriented. Compliance minutiae keeps the trains running on time. I opened my calendar. 7 meetings today, including the cross-divisional review where I'd be presenting operational audit findings. Andrew would be there. His entire team would be there. And now I knew exactly how they'd interpret everything I said. My email inbox held 47 new messages. One stood out. Sent at 11:47 p.m. last night while I'd been lying awake listening to Andrew's key in the door. Sender: Claire Donovan, Compliance Director. Subject: Quarterly Discrepancy Review for Division 3. Marked confidential. I clicked it open. Julia? Routine audit flagged an inconsistency in Division 3's client billing records, Q2 through Q3. Nothing urgent, but worth reviewing before the board meeting next week. Can you pull the detailed ledgers for Hartwell Industries and Westbrook Tech? Something's not reconciling between logged hours and billed amounts. Let's discuss privately before escalating. Claire. Division 3, Andrew's division. I stared at the email, reading it 3 times. Claire didn't use words like inconsistency casually. She wrote with legal precision. Inconsistency meant something didn't match. Not reconciling meant numbers that should align didn't. I opened the firm's internal database, entering my new Senior Operations Director credentials for the first time. The system granted access with a green checkmark. Welcome, Senior Operations Director Julia Benson. Full clearance activated. Full clearance. That meant I could see everything now. Every division. Every client account. Every partner's billing records, time logs, expense reports. My full clearance covered this scope under our operations oversight policy. I documented each query ID in the case notes. The architecture of the firm laid out in spreadsheets I'd helped design, never imagining I'd use them to investigate my own husband. I navigated to Division 3, then filtered by Andrew's client portfolio. Hartwell Industries appeared first. $840,000 in billings over 2 quarters. Standard audit work. But when I pulled the detailed time logs, something felt wrong. Andrew had logged 127 billable hours on the Hartwell account. His team had logged an additional 312 hours, total 439 hours billed at our standard rates. But the internal project tracker, the system we use to monitor actual work completion, showed only 284 hours logged with specific task codes. 155 hours of discrepancy. I opened a second screen, pulling Westbrook Tech's records. The same pattern emerged. Andrew logged 93 hours. His team logged 201. Total billing 294 hours. Internal task tracking 171 hours. 123 hours missing. I sat back in my chair, leather creaking in the silent office. Gray dawn had shifted to pale morning light, the city outside beginning its daily resurrection. Cars on the street below. People walking to subway stations. The ordinary machinery of a Thursday morning, completely unaware that I was sitting here discovering my husband might be committing billing fraud. Might be. That word felt important. There could be explanations. System errors. Logging mistakes. Hours worked but not properly coded. But Andrew managed Division 3. He reviewed his team's billing personally. He signed off on client invoices before they went to accounting. If there were discrepancies this large, he either knew or was negligent enough not to notice. My phone buzzed. Text from Andrew: sorry about leaving you to close out dinner. Hope you're not upset. Love you. I looked at the message for exactly 5 seconds, then set the phone face down without responding. I pulled up the third client in Andrew's portfolio. Dalton Industries, our largest account, the one I'd personally saved after Andrew nearly destroyed the relationship. The account now generated $3.2 million annually. Andrew's division billed 612 hours to Dalton Industries in Q3 alone. The internal task tracker showed 389 hours logged, 223 hours of nothing. I needed to verify this wasn't a system error. I checked the audit trail for each entry, reviewing user IDs, timestamps, IP addresses. Everything appeared legitimate. The billed hours had been entered by Andrew's team, approved by Andrew, and invoiced to clients. The internal hours had been logged by the same people, at the same times, from the same workstations. I ran a WIP reconciliation, cross-referencing work-in-progress reports with final billing statements. The discrepancy persisted. I re-indexed the database and pulled the reports again, checking for data corruption or sync failures. The numbers didn't change. 278 hours of overbilling across 3 accounts. But billing rates varied by staff level. Partners billed at $450 per hour, senior associates at $325, junior staff at $200. Without knowing exactly which phantom hours belonged to which staff member, I could only estimate the financial impact. I also confirmed that our rate card for the quarter matched the contracts on file. No mid-quarter adjustments could explain the delta. I created a new folder on my desktop, labeled it Q3 Review Personal, and began exporting records. Every billing statement, every time log, every task completion report, every email Andrew had sent about these accounts. But I couldn't stop there. If I only investigated the accounts Claire had flagged, someone could argue I was cherry-picking evidence. I needed to know if this pattern extended beyond the obvious cases. I pulled 2 additional clients from Division 3 at random. Sinclair Manufacturing and Pemberton Financial used the same methodology. Compared billed hours to internal task tracking using identical criteria. Sinclair Manufacturing 87 hours of discrepancy. Pemberton Financial 64 hours of discrepancy. The pattern held. This wasn't isolated to the accounts Claire had noticed. It was systematic. I ran the calculations, accounting for variable billing rates and staff mix. Conservative estimate $300,000 in fraudulent billing. High estimate $360,000. Either way, enough to end careers. Enough for criminal charges. This wasn't marriage tension spilling into work. This was professional misconduct. And Andrew had signed his name on every invoice, every billing statement, every certification that the hours represented actual work performed. The ethical requirements were clear. As Senior Operations Director, if I suspected billing fraud, I had an obligation to report it. Not to Andrew, not to our marriage, to the firm's board, to the clients being overcharged, to the professional standards that made our industry function. But I sat there in the gray morning light, listening to the building come alive around me, and wondered if I was seeing what was actually there, or what I wanted to see after last night's humiliation. Was this discovery, or revenge disguised as professionalism? My office door opened. No knock. Claire Donovan walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. She set 1 cup on my desk, kept the other, and sat in my guest chair with the air of someone settling in for a difficult conversation. "You pulled the records," she said. Not a question. Yes. And? I met her eyes. Claire was 54, steel gray hair cut short, glasses that made her look simultaneously stern and grandmotherly. She'd been with the firm 23 years, surviving 3 managing partners and countless young partners who thought compliance was optional until it wasn't. 278 hours of discrepancies across 3 major accounts, I said. Q2 through Q3. I sampled 2 additional clients using identical methodology. Same pattern. Estimated overbilling between $300,000 and $360,000 depending on staff mix. Claire sipped her coffee without visible reaction. I found 312 hours. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see this. Because Andrew's my husband. Because Andrew's your husband, she confirmed. And because you just got promoted. First week as Senior Operations Director, and you're looking at potential fraud in your spouse's division. Not exactly an ideal situation. I pulled up the Hartwell Industries file, rotating my monitor so Claire could see. The pattern's consistent. His team logs hours internally, but the client billing shows 30 to 40% more. Small enough to avoid immediate flags, large enough to add up. I checked the audit trail, I continued. User IDs, timestamps, IP addresses. Everything's legitimate on the surface. The billed hours were entered, approved, and invoiced through proper channels. I ran WEP reconciliation, re-indexed the database. The discrepancy persists. This isn't a system error. Claire set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Julia, I need you to understand something. Once we report this officially, there's no walking it back. The board will investigate. Clients will be notified. If Andrew's involved deliberately, he'll face termination, possibly legal action. Your marriage will be collateral damage. My marriage is already damaged, I said quietly. I just didn't know how much until yesterday. She studied me, trying to assess structural integrity in something she'd thought was solid. What happened yesterday? I told her. Not everything. Not the wine glass I'd left behind or the counting to 10 in the hallway. Just the essential facts. The overheard conversation. The pity promotion. The team that learned my role was ceremonial, my expertise secretarial, my promotion diversity theater. Claire's jaw tightened with each sentence, her hands gripping the chair arms. When I finished, she sat quietly for nearly 30 seconds. "He said this in front of his entire team," she finally said. 6 associates. All men. All learning that undermining me is acceptable because the person they report to thinks I'm fundamentally unqualified. And now you've discovered billing irregularities in his division. Yes. Claire stood, walking to my window, looking out at the city waking below. Morning traffic had thickened. Sunlight broke through clouds, casting long shadows. "If you report this," she said, still looking out, "people will say you're retaliating. That you heard something hurtful and you're using your new position to attack your husband professionally. They'll dismiss the evidence, question your motives, turn this into a domestic dispute that happened to involve the office. I know. If you don't report this," Claire continued, turning back to face me, "you're complicit. You've seen the evidence. You have authority now. You're not just Andrew's wife anymore. You're senior operations director, and one of your divisions is committing fraud. Your obligation is to the firm, to the clients, to professional integrity." I looked at my monitors, at the spreadsheets full of numbers that didn't lie the way people did, at the files I'd downloaded, evidence that would destroy the man I'd married, the man who'd stood in a restaurant last night and explained why I wasn't enough. "What would you do?" I asked. Claire smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I'd verify everything 3 times. I'd document every finding. I'd build a case so airtight that nobody could dismiss it as emotional reaction. And then I'd report it, knowing that doing the right thing sometimes costs everything." She walked toward the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. "Brian Ellis is in early today. He usually runs at 5:30 a.m., showers here, works until the office opens. If you wanted to discuss your audit findings before the official compliance review, now would be the time. Before Andrew arrives. Before politics complicate facts." Then she was gone, leaving her coffee cup on my desk and a decision hanging in the air like gray light slowly turning to day. I pulled up Brian Ellis's calendar. His first official meeting wasn't until 9, but his car was in the garage. His office lights were on. And I was sitting here with evidence that demanded attention, regardless of what it would cost me. I opened a new email. "Brian, Senior Operations Audit has identified significant billing discrepancies in Division 3. Request urgent meeting before official compliance review. Time sensitive. Julia." I hit send before I could reconsider. Before I could wonder if I was doing this because it was right, or because Andrew had called my life's work a pity project while his team laughed into their wine. My phone lit up. Andrew's name. Calling now, probably from his car, probably cheerful and oblivious. Expecting that I'd forgiven last night because I always forgave, always smoothed over, always prioritized his comfort over my clarity. I let it ring until voicemail caught it. Then I turned back to my monitors, to the spreadsheets that told truth in columns and formulas, and waited for Brian Ellis to respond. The coffee Claire had brought me had gone cold. The morning light had shifted from gray to pale gold. And somewhere in this building, Andrew was probably arriving for work, completely unaware that the trains I'd kept running on time for 17 years were about to derail in a direction he'd never anticipated. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel righteous. I felt the way ice probably feels when it's forming on a window. Cold. Clear. Inevitable. My computer chimed. Email notification from Brian Ellis. My office. 7:30 a.m. 23 minutes from now. 23 minutes to prepare for a conversation that would end one version of my life and begin another. I pulled up the files again, checked every number, verified every discrepancy, organized the evidence the way I'd organized everything in my 17 years here, methodically. Precisely. With the detail-oriented competence Andrew thought was my limitation, but was actually my greatest weapon. The numbers didn't lie. Someone else did. Outside my window, the city had fully woken. People rushing to meetings, to deadlines, to obligations they couldn't avoid. I watched them for a moment, these strangers living their lives, unaware that somewhere in this building, a woman they'd never meet was about to stop protecting a man who'd never protected her. Then I gathered my files, checked my reflection in the darkened computer screen to make sure I looked like someone who belonged in a senior operations. director's office and walked toward the elevator that would take me to the 15th floor, to Brian Ellis's office, to the conversation that would prove whether my promotion was pity or power. Brian Ellis's office occupied the southeast corner of the 15th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering views of the harbor and financial district. I'd been here dozens of times for quarterly reviews and budget approvals, but I'd never walked in carrying evidence that would destroy a partner's career, especially not when that partner slept in my bed. His door was open. Brian sat at his desk reviewing something on his tablet, still wearing his running gear beneath an unbuttoned dress shirt. He looked up when I knocked. "Julia," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Come in." I sat down, placing my folder on the edge of his desk with steady hands. Behind Brian, morning sun cast long shadows across the harbor. "Your email said time sensitive," he said. "What did you find?" I opened the folder, pulling out the summary sheet. Numbers organized in clean columns, comparisons highlighted in yellow, discrepancies marked in red. Division 3 has systematic billing discrepancies across multiple client accounts, I began. Q2 through Q3, I found 278 hours of overbilled time that don't match internal task tracking. I verified this isn't a system error. The pattern is consistent and deliberate. Brian took the summary sheet, studying the numbers the way surgeons study x-rays, looking for fractures beneath the surface. "You sampled beyond the flagged accounts?" he asked. 2 additional clients using identical methodology. Same pattern. Conservative estimate of fraudulent billing between $300,000 and $360,000. His jaw tightened slightly. Brian had built this firm over 28 years. But billing fraud destroyed client trust, invited regulatory scrutiny, exposed the firm to legal liability that could end partnerships and careers. "Division 3, he said quietly. "Andrew's division." "Yes. And you're certain about this?" I'd expected that question. I verified every entry 3 times. The billed hours were entered by his team, approved by Andrew, and invoiced to clients through proper channels, but the internal project tracker shows significantly fewer hours actually worked. The discrepancy is real and it's systematic. Brian set down the summary sheet and removed his reading glasses. "Julia, I need to ask you something directly. Did something happen between you and Andrew that's influencing this audit?" There it was. The question that would follow me through every stage of this process. The insinuation that I was acting from emotion rather than evidence. I counted to 10 in my head, the way I'd counted in the hallway at Marcello's. Then I met Brian's eyes with calm certainty. "Something happened," I said. "I discovered my husband has been systematically defrauding our clients while signing his name on false certifications. That's what happened." Brian studied me for a long moment. Then he pulled the summary sheet closer and read through it again, more slowly. Claire flagged the initial discrepancy. "You followed up independently?" "Yes. I used my senior operations director. Clearance to access Division 3 billing records. My access was authorized under operations oversight policy. I documented every query ID and case notes. That's good methodology." Brian stood, walking to his window. "If we proceed with this, there's no walking it back. The board will authorize a full investigation. We'll need to notify clients. If the fraud is confirmed, Andrew will face termination and possible criminal charges." "My obligation isn't to my marriage," I said quietly. "It's to professional integrity and to clients who trusted us with their business." Brian turned back to face me. "I'm not asking you to protect Andrew. I'm asking if you're prepared for what comes next. Some will say you're retaliating. Others will question whether you can be objective. The politics will be brutal." "The numbers don't lie," I said. "Someone else did." Something shifted in Brian's expression. Recognition that the detail-oriented woman Andrew had dismissed was now holding him accountable with those same details. "All right," Brian said, returning to his desk. "I'm authorizing a preliminary internal audit under your direct supervision. You'll report findings to me and to the board's audit committee. Claire stays involved as compliance oversight. We'll need IT support for deeper forensics. I'll assign Logan Pierce from our systems team." He pulled up his calendar, typing quickly. "We'll schedule a board review for Monday. That gives you 4 days to complete preliminary findings. Can you do that?" "Yes. You understand what you're taking on? You'll be overseeing your husband's compliance review. This will be the hardest professional work you've ever done." I thought about the wine glass I'd left on the table at Marcello's, the symbol of restraint I'd chosen over confrontation. "I understand," I said. "Then we proceed." Brian stood, offering his hand across the desk. I shook it, feeling the formality transform our relationship. I gathered my folder and walked toward the door. Julia, Brian said. For what it's worth, I think the board made the right call with your promotion. You earned it. Every part of it. I nodded and walked out. The elevator moved too slowly, giving me time to process what I'd just set in motion. 4 days to document my husband's professional destruction with the same methodical precision he'd mocked as lack of vision. My phone buzzed as I stepped off the elevator. Email notification. Subject line. Urgent Division 3 team meeting. Sender. Andrew Benson. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. 1 hour from now. All Division 3 staff required to attend. No agenda listed. He knew. Somehow he already knew I was auditing him. The professional decision I'd made in Brian Ellis's office had just crossed into personal war. Logan Pierce arrived at my office at 9:15, carrying a laptop and the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who spent more time with servers than people. Senior Director Benson, he said. Claire said you need forensic access to Division 3 billing systems. Everything, I said. Client accounts, time entry logs, approval workflows, backup systems. Logan nodded, already pulling up screens. Within minutes, he'd created a parallel access structure that would let us review Division 3 records without triggering internal notifications. This creates a mirror of their database, Logan explained. Any query we run won't show up in their activity logs. How long until Andrew figures out he's under audit? Logan glanced at me, weighing how honest to be. If he's smart, he already knows. Your access to Division 3 files is logged at the system level. If he's been checking administrative reports, he saw your queries yesterday. That explained the team meeting, Andrew rallying his associates before my narrative could take hold. Claire appeared in my doorway, carrying more coffee and a leather portfolio that looked ominous. Julia, we need to talk about what Logan's going to find. She closed my office door and sat down. Placing the portfolio on my desk with careful precision, I pulled archived records going back 18 months. This isn't recent. It's been happening since Q1 of last year. 18 months. Through 2 audit cycles. Through quarterly reviews, I'd helped facilitate. How much total, I asked. Claire opened the portfolio, revealing printed spreadsheets covered in annotations. Preliminary estimates $700,000 to $850,000. Not the $300,000 I'd calculated for 2 quarters. This was sustained, deliberate, systematic fraud spanning multiple audit periods. For the next 2 hours, the 3 of us worked in focused silence. Logan ran database queries that generated reports I compared against Claire's archived records. Every client account Andrew managed showed the same pattern. Hours billed that didn't match internal tracking. Small percentages that added up to massive theft. Throughout the morning, my phone rang repeatedly with Andrew's calls. I let each one go to voicemail. Then at noon, he tried a different approach. Text message, Julia, we need to talk. I know you're upset about dinner. Please don't do anything professionally that you'll regret personally. I read the message 3 times. The veiled threat wrapped in concern. Don't do anything professionally that you'll regret personally. I screenshot the message and saved it to my evidence folder. Logan looked up from his laptop, his expression troubled. I found something else. He turned his screen toward me. A folder structure buried deep in Division 3's shared drive, labeled Forecast Q4 with custom permissions. Only Andrew had access. Your senior director clearance overrides individual permissions for audit purposes, Logan said, already clicking through. I'm in. The folder opened. Inside were dozens of Excel files, each labeled with a client name and date range. I clicked on Hartwell Industries Q2 review. The spreadsheet loaded, revealing 2 sets of columns, one labeled actual hours and another labeled billed hours. Between them, a column titled Adjustment showed the difference. It was all there, documented in Andrew's own files. The actual hours worked versus the hours billed to clients. The systematic inflation of every invoice. He'd kept a ledger of his own fraud. Why would he document this? Claire asked. Because he thought no one would ever look, I said quietly. Because he thought his detail-oriented wife was too busy keeping trains running on time to notice. Logan was already working, copying files to an encrypted external drive. The progress bar moved slowly, 23%, 47%, 89%, then 95%. Logan ejected the drive and handed it to me. Full backup. Every file, every timestamp. Admissible in any audit review or legal proceeding. I held the drive in my palm. Small enough to fit in my pocket. Heavy enough to end a marriage and a career. My phone rang again. This time I answered. Julia, Andrew's voice carried forced casualness. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I've been busy. Can we talk, maybe grab lunch? I'm working. Working on what? The casualness slipped. Julia, if this is about what you overheard at dinner, I'm sorry. I was just venting. I looked at my monitors, at the evidence of systematic fraud, at the folder labeled Forecast Q4 containing his own documentation of theft. I know exactly how it is, I said. Then let's talk about it like adults. Andrew, I'm in the middle of an audit. I'll talk to you when I have findings to report. Silence. Then his voice came back colder now, stripped of false warmth. An audit of what? Division 3 billing compliance. Who authorized that? Brian Ellis. Another silence. I could almost hear him processing, understanding that I wasn't just upset. I was investigating him professionally. Julia, you need to be very careful right now, Andrew said. His voice had transformed completely. Just warning. You're a week into your promotion? You don't want to make enemies by overreaching on some compliance witch hunt. I am trying to prove something, I said, that the numbers add up. Either they do or they don't. We should discuss this at home. This is a professional matter handled through professional channels. I hung up, set the phone face down on my desk. My hands were shaking slightly. After Claire and Logan left, I sat alone in my office watching the afternoon light shift across my monitors. The encrypted drive sat on my desk. Outside my window, the city continued its ordinary business. People trusting that the systems around them functioned with integrity. My phone buzzed. Andrew, I'm coming to your office. I stood, gathered my laptop and the encrypted drive, and walked out. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, walking down 14 flights with steady steps. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for 5 minutes, breathing, counting to 10. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Andrew. I ignored them all. He once said I was built for execution, not strategy. He was right. Because I wasn't strategizing anymore. I was executing. Methodically. Precisely. With the detail-oriented competence he'd dismissed as my limitation, I started the car and drove home to collect clothes for an extended stay somewhere else, because the house we shared wasn't safe anymore. The marriage we'd built wasn't real anymore, and the man I'd loved for 12 years had become someone I was professionally obligated to expose. The detail-oriented woman was about to show him exactly what execution looked like. The boardroom on Monday morning felt different than it had during budget reviews or strategic planning sessions. The same mahogany table, the same leather chairs, the same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. But the air carried a weight I'd never felt before, the particular gravity that comes when an institution prepares to excise one of its own. I arrived at 8:45, 15 minutes early, carrying my laptop and the encrypted drive in a leather portfolio that matched Claire's. Brian Ellis was already there, reviewing printed copies of our findings. Claire sat beside him, her steel-gray hair perfectly arranged, her expression professionally neutral. The board members filed in over the next 10 minutes. Margaret Blake, our lead external auditor. David Rothman, an independent board member from the Client Advisory Council. Patricia Wells from legal. Thomas Garrett, the firm's founding partner, now semi-retired but still attending critical meetings. Each one nodded at me with the careful courtesy people use when they're not sure what role you're playing in the drama about to unfold. Andrew arrived at exactly 9 a.m. He wore his charcoal Tom Ford suit, the one he saved for court appearances and major client presentations. His tie was Windsor knotted, his shoes polished to reflection. He looked like a man prepared to win an argument, not lose a career. His eyes found mine across the table. For a moment, something passed between us. Recognition. Challenge. The accumulated weight of 12 years of marriage and 17 years of working in the same building, all of it reduced to this. 2 people on opposite sides of evidence. He sat 3 chairs down from me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same scent he'd worn at Marcello's when his team had laughed about my pity promotion. Brian Ellis cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for attending on short notice," Brian said, beginning the meeting. "We're here to review preliminary findings from an internal audit of Division 3 billing practices. Senior Operations Director Julia Benson led the investigation. Julia, please present your findings." I stood, connecting my laptop to the projector. The screen behind me lit up with the title slide Division 3 Billing Compliance Review, Q1 2024 through Q3 2025. "Over the past 4 days," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, Compliance Director Claire Donovan, IT Systems Analyst Logan Pierce, and I conducted a comprehensive review of Division 3 client billing records. We identified systematic discrepancies between billed hours and actual work performed. I clicked to the next slide, a table showing the 5 largest accounts in Andrew's portfolio, with 3 columns: billed hours, tracked hours, and discrepancy. Across 18 months, Division 3 overbilled clients by approximately 847 hours, representing between $700,000 and $850,000 in fraudulent charges. Margaret Blake leaned forward, studying the numbers. "What's your methodology for determining actual hours worked?" she asked. "We cross-referenced client billing statements against internal task tracking systems," I said. "Every hour billed should correspond to a logged task with a specific code and timestamp. We found consistent inflation across all major accounts. The pattern was too systematic to be administrative error." I clicked again. The next slide showed the audit trail. User IDs, approval workflows, the electronic signatures that confirmed Andrew had personally reviewed and authorized every inflated invoice. Division 3 partner Andrew Benson approved all billing statements before they went to accounting, I continued. His digital signature appears on every discrepancy we identified. "Those are system-generated approvals," Andrew said. "I review hundreds of invoices every quarter. If there were data entry errors by my team, I wouldn't necessarily catch every discrepancy in task coding." His voice was calm, reasonable, the voice he used with juries when defending complex financial cases. The voice that said this is all a misunderstanding by people who don't understand how sophisticated operations really work. I clicked to the next slide without responding to him directly. The screen now showed a directory tree. One folder highlighted in red, Forecast Q4. During our forensic review, I said, we discovered a hidden folder in Division 3's shared drive with custom access permissions. Only Mr. Benson had authorization to view its contents. I clicked again. The Excel spreadsheet filled the screen. 3 columns clearly labeled: actual hours, billed hours, adjustment. The room went completely silent. Not the comfortable silence of people waiting for more information. The absolute stillness that comes when everyone understands they're looking at evidence that can't be explained away. This folder contains detailed records of actual work performed versus amounts billed to clients, I said. The discrepancies weren't data entry errors. They were calculated adjustments, documented and tracked over multiple quarters. That folder contains forecasting models, draft projections for capacity planning, Andrew said. The metadata shows otherwise, Claire said, speaking for the first time. Her voice cut through the room with legal precision. These files were updated in real time, concurrent with client billing periods. They're not projections. They're records? Patricia Wells from Legal was making notes, her pen moving rapidly across her pad. Thomas Garrett, the founding partner, sat back in his chair with an expression that looked like grief. I clicked to the final slide. A summary of findings, recommendations, and next steps. My hands were steady on the laptop, but I could feel my pulse in my throat. "We recommend immediate suspension pending full investigation," I said. "Client notification and restitution planning, and referral to the state bar for potential ethics violations." Brian Ellis stood. "Thank you, Julia." "Claire." He looked around the table. "Questions for the audit team?" David Rothman spoke first. "You verified these findings independently?" "Yes," Claire said. "I personally reviewed archived records going back 2 years. The pattern is consistent and deliberate." "And the hidden folder was definitely created by Mr. Benson?" David asked. "User logs confirm it," I said. "Created 14 months ago, accessed regularly, updated after each billing cycle." "Do you want to respond to these findings?" Margaret said, turning to Andrew. Andrew looked at me, then at the screen behind me, then at the faces around the table. I watched him calculate. Saw him realize that the detail-oriented wife he'd dismissed had built a case so thorough there was no angle for defense. "I'd like to consult with my attorney before making any statement," he said. "Andrew, you're suspended effective immediately pending completion of this investigation," Thomas said. "You'll surrender your access credentials, company devices, and office keys to HR before leaving the building today. This is a professional disagreement being weaponized into something it's not," Andrew said, standing slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "My wife overheard a private conversation and decided to retaliate by manufacturing a crisis out of normal billing variations. The evidence speaks for itself," Brian said quietly. "Security will escort you to collect your personal items." I watched Andrew walk toward the door, his posture still straight, his face still composed, but something in his eyes had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by the dawning understanding that the woman he'd spent 12 years dismissing had just ended his career with the same methodical precision he'd mocked as limitation. The door closed behind him. The board members began gathering their materials, speaking in low voices. Claire's hand touched my shoulder briefly, a gesture of solidarity that required no words. Brian Ellis approached me as others filed out. "That was difficult," he said. "Are you all right?" I thought about that question. Was I all right? I'd just presented evidence that destroyed my husband's reputation, ended our marriage, and exposed fraud that would follow him for the rest of his career. I should have felt something. Victory, vindication, the satisfaction of justice served. Instead, I felt the way ice feels. Cold, clear, inevitable. "I'm all right," I said. This was never about him and me. It was about the numbers. They either add up or they don't. Brian nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, the board is grateful. This could have destroyed the firm if it had gone undetected much longer." After he left, I stood alone in the empty boardroom, looking out at the city below. People rushing to work, cars navigating traffic. The ordinary machinery of a Monday morning, completely unaware that somewhere in this building, a marriage had ended and a career had been demolished by a woman whose promotion was supposed to be ceremonial. Power, I realized, didn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just felt like duty performed. Like trains kept running on time, like numbers finally adding up the way they should have all along. 1 week later, I sat in my apartment, temporary housing arranged through the firm's relocation assistance program, and read the email from HR Director Denise Harper. Subject: Personnel matter, confidential, Julia. This is to inform you that following completion of the internal investigation, Andrew Benson's employment with the firm has been terminated effective immediately. The board has authorized client restitution and is cooperating with the State Bar's ethics inquiry. Your professionalism throughout this process has been exemplary. Thank you for your dedication to the firm's integrity. Denise. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. Outside the apartment windows, evening light cast long shadows across the city. The view was different from our house. Smaller, less expensive. But it was mine alone, paid for with my salary, furnished with belongings. I'd chosen without negotiating someone else's preferences. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, Andrew's contact still listed under favorites. I'd meant to delete it every day this week. Kept putting it off, some part of me, not ready to make that symbolic gesture final. Now I picked up the phone, found his name, and pressed delete. The confirmation prompt appeared. Remove contact? I pressed yes. Andrew Benson disappeared from my phone with the same efficiency. He'd disappeared from the firm. Gone. Erased. Reduced to a cautionary story. People would tell new hires about the importance of ethical conduct. The apartment was quiet. No footsteps on the stairs. No key turning in the lock. No pretense of partnership in a marriage. That had been hollow for longer than I'd admitted. Just silence. Clean. Uncomplicated. Mine. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "I thought you might be tired of takeout by now," Claire said, standing in the hallway, holding a bottle of wine and a bag from the Italian place on 9th Street. I let her in. We ate at my small dining table, the kind of meal that exists in the comfortable silence between people who've survived something difficult together. Claire didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't offer platitudes about time healing wounds or better days ahead. She just sat across from me, eating pasta and occasionally meeting my eyes with understanding that required no words. "The board meeting this morning was interesting," Claire said finally, setting down her fork. "They voted to restructure Division 3 entirely. New leadership, new oversight protocols. Margaret Blake specifically cited your audit methodology as the model for future compliance reviews." I was just doing my job. "You were doing everyone's job," Claire said, correcting me gently. "Most people would have looked the other way. Protected the marriage. Convinced themselves the numbers were explainable." I thought about that. About all the times over the years I'd smoothed over Andrew's mistakes, filled gaps in his presentations, covered for his carelessness with clients. The accumulated weight of protection offered to someone who'd never protected me in return. I spent 12 years making myself smaller, so he could feel bigger, I said quietly. "I'm done with that." Claire nodded, raising her wine glass. "To being done with that?" We finished dinner. Claire left around 8, squeezing my shoulder in the doorway with the same gesture of solidarity she'd offered in the boardroom. After she was gone, I stood at my apartment window, looking out at the harbor in the distance. The same view I'd seen from Marcello's private dining room a week ago. Same city. Same lights reflecting on black water. Different Julia looking at it. On Thursday, I attended my first full senior leadership meeting as the permanent senior operations director. No provisional title. No asterisk noting my recent promotion. Just my name on the agenda, beside recommendations for firm-wide audit protocols based on Division 3 findings. The other partners listened when I spoke, actually listened, leaning forward, taking notes, asking substantive questions instead of dismissive ones. Marcus Reed, who'd laughed when Andrew called my promotion symbolic, now addressed me as Senior Director Benson, and avoided eye contact when we passed in the hallway. Jordan Price, who'd participated in mocking my expertise, requested my approval on his client. Billing procedures with an email that bordered on obsequious. I didn't enjoy their discomfort. Didn't feel satisfaction watching them realize I held real authority they'd underestimated. I just felt the quiet certainty that comes from knowing your competence speaks louder than anyone's dismissal ever could. "This is excellent work," Brian said, setting the quarterly operations report on my desk. "The board wants to implement your recommendations firm-wide. Standard operating procedure from now on." "Thank you." He hesitated in the doorway, weighing whether to say something else. Finally, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about your marriage. I know this couldn't have been easy." I looked at him. This man who'd trusted my evidence even when it implicated my husband, who'd authorized an investigation that could have destroyed my credibility. If I'd been wrong, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, I said honestly. But it was also the right thing. Those don't always align, but when they do, you don't get to look away. That evening I drove to Marcello's, not for dinner, not for celebration, just to see the space again, to close a circle that had opened there. The restaurant was busy, Friday night crowd filling the main dining room. I walked past the tables, past the bar, to the hallway that led to the private rooms. The door to our room was closed, probably hosting someone else's milestone, someone else's accomplishment, someone else's story. I stood in that hallway remembering how I'd stood here a week ago, frozen, listening to my husband explain why I wasn't enough. Remembered counting to 10. Remembered the ice forming in my chest, patterns spreading with geometric certainty. The wine glass I'd left on the table would be long gone now, cleared away by staff, washed, returned to circulation. No trace remaining of the symbol I'd left behind. That felt right somehow. The glass wasn't mine to hold anymore. Neither was the marriage it represented, or the version of myself, who'd believed diminishing her own light made someone else's shine brighter. I walked back through the restaurant, past the bar, where couples sat close together, past the tables where people laughed over food. They'd actually earned the right to celebrate. Outside, the autumn air was cold again, sharp in my throat. But I didn't hurry to my car. I stood on the sidewalk, looking at the harbor lights, reflecting on black water, and let myself feel the complete weight of everything that had changed. Andrew once said I wasn't built for strategy. He'd meant it as criticism, proof that my detail-oriented competence made me fundamentally unsuited for leadership. But he'd been wrong about what strategy really was. Strategy wasn't manipulation or political maneuvering or the elaborate games people played to avoid accountability. Strategy was knowing when to stop protecting the wrong person, when to let the numbers speak for themselves, when to choose integrity over comfort, even when integrity cost everything. I didn't need a strategy to defeat Andrew. I just needed to stop protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. The numbers did the rest, because numbers, unlike people, don't lie. They either add up or they don't, and mine finally did. I got in my car and drove back to my apartment, to my temporary life, that was slowly becoming permanent, to the version of myself I'd spent 17 years becoming and 12 years suppressing, the detail-oriented woman, the one built for execution, the one who kept the trains running on time, while everyone else took credit for the destinations they reached. That woman didn't need anyone's validation anymore. Not Andrew's, not the board's, not even her own sometimes wavering confidence. In whether she'd done the right thing, she just needed to know the numbers added up. And they did, finally, completely, with the cold clarity of truth that couldn't be argued away or diminished, or called a pity project by people who'd never understood what she was capable of. The trains were still running. They always had been. The difference now was that I wasn't running them for someone else's glory. I was running them because that's what I did. Methodically, precisely. With a competence that needed no translation, no defense, no permission from anyone who'd ever called it something less than it was. He'd said I was built for execution, not strategy. He was right about the execution part. I just stopped executing his version of our story and started executing my own.